First of all, do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath has bound medical professionals for thousands of years with the simple commitment to use their knowledge only to help others. Even the terrified prisoners stepping off the train into the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp might still have clung to the hope that the Nazi physicians overseeing them would honor their oath to do no harm. But the man who awaited them as they stepped off those train carts, clad in his white SS medical uniform and wearing a blank stare as he looked upon the suffering souls before him, was a creature none of them could have possibly been prepared for. The man who would be dubbed the Angel of Death had no mercy, no remorse, and no hesitation. As the prisoners stepped off the carts, the Angel of Death passed judgment on each of them. Some he dismissed as useless. They'd be dead before the day's end. The useful ones would be put to work until exhaustion, disease, or the camp's fickle masters decided to end their lives. But the most unlucky ones were the ones that the Angel of Death took a special liking to. Those chosen victims would be carted off to his own little kingdom within the Auschwitz camp to act as test subjects for the most monstrous experiments in the history of medical science. This is the story of Josef Mengele, a man so cruel that he stood out even among the Nazis at Auschwitz as the worst of the worst. To tell the story of such a man, we have to go back to the beginning. What childhood horrors could have twisted a man into what Mengele became? What signs were ignored by parents, teachers, and friends that could have warned them of what was to come? Well, almost none. One of the most frightening aspects of Mengele's story is that there's really nothing in his early years to foreshadow what he would do. He was born on March 16, 1911, to a middle-class family in Günzburg, Bavaria. His home life was unremarkable, no abuse or tragedy to speak of, and he lived a normal life as an entirely average student for most of his childhood. The only odd feature of Mengele's early years was a bone infection he suffered at age 15, which left him bedridden for several months. He recovered with no serious long-term effects, but he had missed several months of school. This absence apparently motivated the young Mengele to study harder to catch up, and he ended up surpassing his classmates to become a top-grade student. This academic achievement earned him a spot at Munich University to study anthropology in 1930. Intelligent and charismatic, Mengele's university life was one of social and academic success, but this is where the seeds of his atrocities were finally planted. At the time, eugenics was the accepted wisdom of the scientific community. Like a good student, Mengele absorbed all of these ideas. He fully believed that different groups of people, specifically Aryans, were genetically superior to others, and so-called undesirables like criminals, the poor, and the disabled should be removed from the gene pool to protect Aryan genes from corruption. By the 1930s, Hitler's Nazis and other right-wing groups had popularized racial eugenics, which Mengele embraced wholeheartedly. His belief in eugenics led him to become involved with far-right politics as a student. As an athletic and charismatic young German man, he was welcomed into the far-right paramilitary group the Steel Helmets, which were later absorbed into the Nazi enforcers known as the Brown Shirts, or SA. After studying jaw morphology across 4 racial groups for his thesis, he graduated with a PhD in anthropology in 1935 and was awarded a Doctor of Medicine degree from Frankfurt University 2 years later. At Frankfurt, he was hired by Dr. Ottmar Freiherr von Vosscher at the university's Institute for Hereditary Biology and Racial Hygiene, where he continued his work of eugenics and played a role in assessing and enforcing racial discrimination under the Nuremberg laws. It was here that Mengele developed a specific fascination with twins. He and Dr. Vosscher believed that twins offered the most efficient method to ascertain inherited human traits, particularly diseases. Not long after, in 1937, he joined the Nazi Party, and the next year, he became a member of the SS, a special Nazi unit that acted both like a police force and a private army for Hitler. It had its own ranks, similar to the military. Mengele eventually reached the rank of Hauptsturmführer, which was about the same as a captain. Like all German men, Mengele had to do military service, which he did as a rifleman for 3 months in 1938, before returning home to marry Irene Schenbein in 1939 ready to continue his scientific career. The outbreak of war at the end of the year upended his plans. Mengele was called to serve in a reserve medical battalion of the Waffen-SS in 1940, and was then sent to Poland to conduct work for the genealogical section of the Race and Resettlement Office, where he judged the ethnic suitability of people in the region for resettlement. Eventually, the needs of the Eastern Front pressed him into frontline service against the Soviet Union. He spent several months on the front line as a medical officer, where he earned the rank of captain and an Iron Cross for pulling 2 comrades from a burning tank before being seriously injured on the banks of the Don River in summer 1942. After recovering from his injuries, Mengele was allowed to resume his eugenics work. His old boss, Dr. Verschuer, was appointed director of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Heredity, and Eugenics, and used his position to grant Mengele whatever he wished. Mengele decided that he wanted to study eugenics in depth, with as many easily accessible test subjects as possible, and no moral restrictions on what he could do with them. His request was simple.
Send me to Auschwitz.
On May 30th, 1943, Josef Mengele arrived at the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. His official role was as the chief physician for the gypsy inmates of the camp, but in practice he was given free rein across the entire camp. With his medical authority in the camp and his interest in acquiring prisoners as test subjects, Mengele was an obvious choice to conduct the infamous selections for new prisoners. When new prisoners arrived, they would be lined up for someone like Mengele to inspect them and decide their fate. Twins, dwarves, and anyone who appeared to be medically interesting were picked off for his experiments. The rest were divided into 2. Those who looked healthy enough were sent to one side. They'd go to the barracks and work until their usefulness ran out. The rest, the old, the sick, the pregnant, and more, were sent in the other direction. They were due for the gas chambers. Mengele participated in around 80 of these selections during his time at Auschwitz, and as a result, he personally sent thousands, probably tens of thousands, of victims to gas chambers. Prisoners and former camp staff noted that Mengele was uniquely indifferent to the horror of the whole affair. Even hardened SS officers were usually unsettled by the selections, and many could only do it while drunk. Mengele was one of the only men at Auschwitz who could decide the fate of thousands of lives in an afternoon with the same cold, calm demeanor one would have when trying to decide what to eat for dinner. If anything, Mengele seemed to enjoy it. When reviewing the medical information of one recent prisoner for selection, he noted she had a very high temperature. He jokingly asked her,
"Well, you've been on the other side already. How are things over there?"
When the patient shrugged without an answer, he told her,
"You'll know soon enough."
That afternoon, she went to the gas chambers. As the camp's medical authority, Mengele also oversaw the handling of disease outbreaks. The squalid conditions of the camps were a breeding ground for illnesses that were as deadly to the inmates as the gas chambers or the camp guards. Mengele's approach to controlling it was typically cruel and indifferent. During a typhus outbreak in February 1944, Mengele ordered 600 women from one building to be killed in the gas chambers. Then he cleaned and disinfected their empty building. Next, he moved women from the neighboring building into the clean one after washing them and giving them fresh clothes. He repeated this process building by building, killing prisoners each time to make space for his cleanup effort. Mengele did this cruel practice several times, willingly killing hundreds to stop diseases from spreading. In another outbreak in July 1944, he killed all 4,000 people in one infected area instead of trying to treat them. But Mengele's true job at Auschwitz concerned his experiments. Mengele's goal at Auschwitz was to use genetics to prove Nazi claims of the racial superiority of the German Aryans. With its inmates made up of racially and politically targeted groups, Mengele had a near infinite supply of test subjects with which to prove this racial difference. The particular focus of Mengele's time in Auschwitz was on twins. Mengele's obsession with them was because of their utility for studying genetics in 2 nearly identical subjects. One twin could be a control and comparison for whenever Mengele experimented upon the other. Mengele's interest in twins was common knowledge in the camp. Camp guards would sort through all new arrivals and pick out the twins for Mengele's work. Believing that it might get them some special treatment, parents often handed over their twins to the guards with some sort of relief, and adult twins voluntarily presented themselves to the camp authorities, hoping to catch Mengele's attention. The horrors of Mengele's methods were obvious early on. Only a few weeks after arriving, the gypsy camp at Birkenau suffered from an outbreak of noma, a disease spread through dirty water. Noma is a severe infection, similar to gangrene, that mostly affects children and often causes death. Mengele seized the opportunity to study such a fascinating disease by setting up a quarantine hospital for the sick where he could observe and catalog the progression of the illness. Treatment, however, was not usually on the agenda. Instead, Mengele observed the progression of the disease as his patients suffered and died in his hospital beds. He then harvested pieces of the victims for further study, some of which were preserved in formaldehyde jars and sent off to SS labs for further testing. One of the most disturbing aspects of this was how easily Mengele could pretend not to have people dying for his experiments in a nearby building, as he put on a friendly face for everyone else. Mengele oversaw a kindergarten of hundreds of gypsy children. It was really a front for the harvesting of test subjects, but Mengele showered the children with sweets, chocolate, meat soup, jam, and other treats that were unheard of elsewhere in the camp. The children called him Der gute Onkel, the good uncle, as he made his appearances with candy and toys, never revealing that many of those toys were taken from the possessions of the dead Jewish children elsewhere in the camp complex. The shockingly normal appearance of Mengele's kindergarten was intentional. When visiting SS or civilians were brought to the camp, Mengele's gypsy kindergarten was used to present a false image of happiness and care to disguise the genocidal reality. The observers were never allowed to check the other buildings where Mengele's subjects writhed in agony, and they would never know how children would regularly vanish from the kindergarten, never to be seen again. While Mengele's first subjects at Auschwitz were gypsies, he expanded to Jews by September 1943. By now, Mengele had hundreds of subjects at his mercy, organized into 3 barracks to fit his different experimental needs. Barracks 1 was home to twin girls between the ages of 2 and 16, and boys up to around 8 years old. Barracks 15 housed the older boys, adult men, and a selection of people with other traits that Mengele was interested in, like deformities and dwarfism. Finally, Barracks 22 housed the twins younger than 2, who were usually kept with their mothers. The number of people in these barracks was constantly fluctuating, as the new subjects were brought in and old ones disappeared. One surviving twin estimates that Barracks 1 typically housed around 350 pairs of twins at any one time. Another survivor offered this glimpse of Barracks 15.
The youngest twin in our group was Pepichko from Czechoslovakia, who was 4 or 5 years old. Most of them were 12 to 15 years old. There were also Jewish triplets from Germany, aged about 60. We also had a family of dwarfs, consisting of 2 men and 5 women.
Life in the barracks was quite similar to life elsewhere in the camp, with a similar diet and living arrangements. The main difference was that other prisoners had to work, but Mengele's chosen prisoners did not. Instead, their only purpose was to wait anxiously, never knowing when Mengele would summon them into the darkness of his secret laboratories. Mengele's sadistic mind was still a scientific one. His studies usually began with extensive cataloging of the subject. Every blemish, every bruise, every mole and scar was recorded. Mengele had extensive photographs taken, as well as x-rays, and made detailed anatomical drawings on features that took his particular interest. He collected blood samples, molds of their teeth, and even harvested spinal fluid from some subjects. Mengele's experiments had little regard for patient safety. In many cases, children were left anemic after he drew too much blood from them, and several died from blood loss. Among the most horrifying of his experiments were forced blood transfusions between twins. Mengele, in his obsession, repeatedly ignored basic blood type compatibility recklessly injecting one twin's blood into the other, leading to tragic and deadly consequences as the body violently rejected incompatible organs and blood. One prisoner recalled a particularly horrific experiment stemming from Mengele's fascination with blood.
An SS man, on Mengele's instructions, took away 2 children. 2. Perhaps 3 days later, the SS man brought them back in a frightening condition. They had been sewn together like Siamese twins. Mengele had sewn their veins together. The wounds were filthy and they festered. The children screamed all night long.
With every photo taken, every measurement recorded, and every file carefully organized, Mengele disguised pure evil as science, turning torture into paperwork and murder into methodical research. Dead victims were subject to dissection too. Mengele had a special dissection laboratory set up in Barracks 12 where he could harvest the organs of dead test subjects. Typically, when a twin died, Mengele would have the other twin killed as well. This would allow him to compare the internal organs and judge exactly what had happened to cause the first twin's death. Any organs of special interest were preserved for study, with many of them being sent back to other SS labs for further tests. Mengele's fascination with dwarfism was another well-known feature. Every dwarf who arrived at Auschwitz was snapped up by Mengele's experiments. They too were meticulously photographed and cataloged before being killed. Mengele made sure to save the skeletons for further study and sent many of them away to his colleagues at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology. Another one of Mengele's bizarre fixations was heterochromia, where someone has 2 different colored eyes. Since eye color was one of the physical traits the Nazis cared most about, it's thought that Mengele wanted to understand why different racial groups had different eye colors and whether they could be altered. Mengele took hundreds of eyeballs from his victims, only some of whom were dead, and kept them for analysis. As one doctor recalled,
"Saw a wooden table with eyeballs lying on it. All of them were tagged with numbers and little notes."
Mengele's time at Auschwitz-Birkenau came to an abrupt end as the Soviets advanced in January 1945. After liquidating his remaining test subjects and gathering what experiment notes he could, he fled Auschwitz on January 18th, barely a week before Soviet troops arrived. He linked up with other fleeing Nazi doctors before making his way to Czechoslovakia, where he found a Wehrmacht uniform and joined a motorized German field hospital traveling west towards U.S. forces. Mengele was finally captured in June 1945. While his crimes were known to Allied intelligence, they were not known to the staff of the prison camps where he was held for several weeks. No one at the camp had realized who he was before he managed to slip away in late 1945. Knowing the Allies would look for him at home, he took up a false name and found a farm in rural Bavaria where he worked as a laborer. By now, the Allies knew Mengele had escaped and counted him among the criminals in white coats, the Nazi doctors who had inflicted horrors on subjects in the name of the regime. However, they failed to find him. His family didn't help, and his wife, Irene, had already moved in with a new man. She had in fact met up with Mengele once in 1946 to inform him that she wanted a divorce, but she did not report him to authorities. Mengele stayed in Europe until 1949. With help from his family and a secret Nazi smuggling group called the Edelweiss Group, he escaped. He crossed the Alps into Italy, got a Swiss passport using the fake name Helmut Gregor, and then sailed to Argentina. Once there, he easily settled in, thanks to President Juan Perón's policy of giving refuge to former Nazis. Mengele spent the early 1950s in wealth and comfort, surrounded by a community of Nazi exiles and protected by the Argentine government. Mengele had little fear of being caught. In 1956, he even returned to Europe to visit his family and used his real name to operate a pharmaceutical company that made him rich. That year, Mengele and Irene finalized their divorce, and 2 years later he remarried his brother's widow, Martha, in South America. It seemed the angel of death would enjoy a pleasant retirement. But that wasn't acceptable to men like Hermann Langbein and countless other Nazi hunters who made it their mission to bring Mengele to justice. Using the divorce documents from his marriage to Irene, Nazi hunters were able to confirm that he had escaped to Argentina. In 1959, Mengele fled to Paraguay after the West German government issued an arrest warrant and extradition request for him. Nazi hunters descended upon Buenos Aires, hoping to find him at the same time that they caught Holocaust architect Adolf Eichmann, but he had already left. Mengele fled to Brazil, where he laid low on a farm in Sao Paulo under another false name. The Israeli Mossad continued to hunt for him, and a bounty of $3 million was issued for his capture, but no one would ever cash it in. Josef Mengele spent his final years hiding in Brazil under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. When he met his son Rolf for the final time in 1977, the Angel of Death remained unrepentant.
I did nothing wrong,
He said.
I was helping those children.
The reports of him sending people to the gas chambers or experimenting on prisoners, verified by numerous eyewitnesses and surviving records, were, in his words, lies made up by the media to smear him. Neither his son nor anyone with even a passing understanding of the history could ever believe him. Josef Mengele finally died of a stroke while swimming on February 6, 1979, but authorities continued to hunt for him for several years afterward. Because of his false identity, authorities did not learn of his death until 1985. The grave marked for Wolfgang was exhumed and forensic tests confirmed that it was Mengele after all. The scale of Mengele's crimes were immense, but the exact numbers are beyond our ability to know. At least 1,500 pairs of twins endured his monstrous experiment, and perhaps 100 pairs survived. The number of other victims taken to satisfy his sadistic medical curiosity certainly numbers in the thousands as well. These people didn't just die. They endured unspeakable horrors before the end as Mengele pursued Nazi racial science at their expense. Beyond that, thousands of people died on his medical recommendations while overseeing the camp quarantines. Tens of thousands more marched into gas chambers at the flick of his indifferent wrist at the prisoner selections. The Angel of Death is one of the most frightening and depressing tales of the Holocaust. It is a story of atrocity inflicted upon innocent people, most of them children, by a callous man in service of an evil ideology. That Mengele walked free from his crimes and never faced justice or regret for what he did is a bitter pill to swallow. The Angel of Death walked free, and history can only look back in despair, praying that no one like him will ever get away with such atrocities again.